Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the debate on the report titled Pegasus and Similar Spyware and Secret State Surveillance. It's document 15825, presented by Mr. Peter Omtzigt on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. In order to finish by 6:40 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers about 6:15 p.m. to allow time for the reply and votes. I call Mr. Omtzigt, the rapporteur. You have... Point of order, yes, Mrs. Jasko. Mrs. Jasko?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, just before we start this point in the agenda, I want to make that yesterday my card didn't work out on the voting on the French report where I was a rapporteur, and I will ask the technicians and the secretariat to take care of it, and please count my vote on that voting, because definitely as a rapporteur, I support my report, and I want my voice also to be counted there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jasko. It's noted, so we take care of it. And then we continue. You have 7 minutes now, and Mr. Omtzigt, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. The floor is yours, Mr. Omtzigt.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Imagine you have your mobile phone, and imagine someone takes it over without you noticing it. So there is no link you have to click on. And your mobile phone turns into a spyware of your own government or another government, can actually listen into what you do, can use your camera and knows what you're doing. It can search all your messages and all your emails. It can look at all your pictures. And if you use a little bit of AI, you can actually figure that spy can actually figure out that you're in love with someone you don't know yourself yet. And it can also see what kind of political contacts you have, and they may be really important. I'm just looking at you by accident, nothing particular, Mr. Chairman. That's what Pegasus is. It is more than we see in 1984, where in the novel of Orwell, you have to go to the screen, click on the screen, and start talking. At that point, you know you're talking to your government. You know you're being watched. With this kind of device, you do not know you're being watched, and the other person knows more about you than you ever knew. And that's frightening. And that's what we're looking at today. There's mounting evidence that such spyware as Pegasus was sold to at least 14 EU member states. And it has been used by several Council of Europe member states, including Poland, Hungary, Greece, Spain, and Azaerbaijan, against journalists, against political opponents, against human rights defenders, against lawyers. Council of Europe and other international legal standards have clearly been breached. Think of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees the right to private life. But also think of Article 18. And please note it has an incredibly chilling effect if you know that your government is using it. Because you know that you can't communicate freely. And in fact, the fairness of the electoral process in countries such as Poland, where it was used against political opponents during the 2019 political campaign, means that that election was not fair. In the resolution, we make a series of specific recommendations to states. So we call on the main countries concerned, Poland, Hungary, Greece, Spain and Azerbaijan, to conduct effective and independent investigation in all cases of abuse and provide redress to victims of unlawful surveillance. I also ask them to inform the Assembly and the Venice Commission about the use of spyware within 3 months. Other states which seem to have acquired or used Pegasus, not unlawfully, should also report back to the Assembly. and the Venice Commission within the same deadline and inform us about the legal framework of oversight mechanism. We talked then about Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. All member states should assure that their national laws on secret surveillance and their implementation are in line with the Court and the Venice Commission standards. In the short term, we need a moratorium, and in the mid-term, we need to regulate it specifically, both the acquisition and the use of spyware, limiting its use to exceptional situations as a measure of last resort. Think of state security. In the resolution, I invite the Venice Commission to assess the legal framework and practice on targeted surveillance of all member states in order to check if it contains adequate and sufficient guarantees. Only then should states be able to use it. If it is adopted, this resolution, I will immediately send letters to the delegations of the states concerned as a first action for follow-up. I will hope to get at least some clear replies from the national authorities concerned, and the future Venice report on the subject will contain specific recommendations on the guidance from states. Finally, and that's very important, in the draft recommendation, I propose that the Committee of Ministers adopts a specific recommendation to member states focusing on acquisition, use, sale and export of spyware. The Committee of Ministers should examine at a later stage the feasibility of a new Council of Europe Convention on this topic. And let me remind you, because we're in the European Parliament today, we had a really good investigation from the PEGA committee here. But the EU has got limited competences in the area of national security. The Council of Europe, on the contrary, surveillance for national security and law enforcement purposes is at the very core of state power. And it must in all circumstances be subject to the rule of law and human rights principles for which the Council of Europe stands for. So we are the organization which should do it, not the EU. I must say that I tend to agree with those who have argued that Pegasus, given its level of intrusion into a person's smartphone, which can be converted in a 24-hour surveillance device with retroactive access to all data, could hardly meet the requirements of proportionality under international human rights law. I do understand that states may need to use it in exceptional circumstances. Think about terrorism, think about state security. But before doing that, we need to have clear legislation, robust oversight mechanism, procedural guarantees and effective remedies. Only then could it be limited to what is strictly necessary in a democratic society, in line with the values of the Council of Europe. And mind you, I've started this work about 10 years ago. This may be my last week here, I don't know. It is one step at a time. We started with the revelations of Mr. Edward Snowden about what it meant to be in a society where the government knows all about you. This goes a number of steps further. And it may look harmless if your government is a democratic government with oversight. But you do lay the foundations for a surveillance state, and all the foundations are in state once the wrong party gets into power. So these tools are extremely dangerous, and we should use extreme care in using them. Thank you.
Much, Mr. Omtzigt. And then we continue with Vladimir Valdayan from EPP Group and Armenia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like, first of all, to congratulate Peter Omtzigt for this brilliant report, very timely report and very topical one. You know, nobody knows whether I have a Pegasus here or not, and nobody of you can be sure that somebody is following you, surveilling you. And I remember when we discussed this issue with the legal committee, Mr. Omtzigt said that somehow Big Brother is following us, and our colleague, Mr. Galchenko, said, no, it's not correct anymore because Big Brother is living with us. And this is the reality. We are now facing a lot of different kinds of technologies which may be used, which may have a dual use. They may used for the good purposes as well as for the purposes of illegal nature. We cannot for sure walk against the technological development. Technology will develop despite the fact that we want it or we do not want it, because it is the life. And unfortunately, law developed less quicker than technologies. But do we have an answer? Yes, we have an answer, and this answer is in the report. Despite the level of technology, what kind of technology you use, please follow the standards of this respective organization, of European Convention on Human Rights, of Venice Commission and other institutions specialized in this matter. Because when we are speaking about different technologies, we should take into account very important fact that these technologies should be used in accordance with the international standards we have. I would like to emphasize a very important thing mentioned in the report. Yes, we should criminalize all the cases then such kind of spy were occurred in the non-state actors' hands, because it would be very complicated furthermore to follow the usage of this kind of spyware. The resolution contains a lot of recommendations to several countries. The situation is not the same in all the countries. Some are in a worse situation, some in a better, but I would like to recommend all of them to continue to start and continue to implement the recommendations mentioned in the report and in the resolution. And finishing my speech, I would like to say the following. In any case, such kind of spywares should be a measures for preventing international wrongful acts. But in no case they should be an instrument for perpetrating international wrongful acts. And if this is the reality, we should take very, very rapid and very tough measures to combat such a usage of this kind of applications. Once again, Mr. Omsik, thank you for the brilliant report.
With Mrs. Sabina Sudik from ALDE Group and from Bosnia and Herzegovina. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Leading up to the ambitious Reykjavik summit, we were wondering whether a certain identity crisis that the Council of Europe may or may not be suffering from will be addressed successfully and whether it will be solved. And it is actually on these kinds of issues that the strength of this institution and the strength of this institution's capacity to address two key questions in its jurisdiction. Number one, human rights protection and addressing human rights violations. And number two, democratic standards can truly be addressed by the Council of Europe, and can we make consequential decisions for the citizens of our member states. And when we take into consideration that 14 countries, members of the EU, bought the Israeli company's software, whose sole purpose, essential purpose, is to target the opposition, the human rights activists, to use it politically motivated to target those that we perceive as our enemies, then the question is, can we truly tackle this issue when the target is actually ourselves, and when we need to look at ourselves in the mirror, critically assess whether we can solve these problems. In this regard, we salute this report. We salute the efforts to seriously point out, in measured and responsible way, point out the vulnerabilities of our system. And if these allegations weren't serious enough in terms of already targeting our own, within our own countries, and targeting members of the opposition and human rights activists, we thought that why not export it to countries even more dangerous towards their citizens, exporting this software by the EU member states to countries with terrible human rights records that we know can be used to endanger lives, let alone their human rights. So in that regard, We fully recommend adoption of this report. We support the conclusions, both by the EU Parliament that this report builds upon, and by this report. And we invite the member states to come fully clean towards the Venice Commission, report their use of this software, and make sure it finds itself in the confines of European Charter or European Convention on Human Rights, and also for ourselves to ask ourselves the question that the experts on this issue have already posed: can softwares like these at all be used within the confines of the European Convention of Human Rights, and whether governments can be trusted at all to decide whether somebody is worth listening to, or at worst, their life made miserable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sudik. And then we continue to Ukraine, to the European Conservatives, and Mr. Alexei Koncharenko. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Rapporteur for excellent job, and not only for this report, for years in this Assembly. But I need to start with something else, because in previous topic, unfortunately, no one Ukrainian MP received a possibility to speak accidentally. So many people wanted to speak. But for us, it's very important, because we Ukrainians, we are coming through this terror every day. And when we saw these horrors from Israel, it is so striking for us. When we saw cars shot down on the road, when we saw with the people inside, when we saw children and women killed in cold blood, that is something we are coming through every day in our country. And strikingly, even with the same weapon, Hamas used Iranian-made weapon against Israel, and Russia is using Iranian-made drones every day against Ukraine. Yesterday, 36 drones again attacked my native city, Odessa, 36 Iranian-made drones. And that Russia, as a terrorist state, is using this, as well as Hamas, as a terrorist organization, is using this. So for us, everything is clear. Hamas equal Iran, equal Russia. And we need to stop evil. And to stop evil, first, we need to name it as evil. So I address all of us to name in our national parliaments Hamas, recognize it as a terrorist organization. I sponsored such bill in Ukrainian parliament, and let us do it together. Speaking about this report, extremely important, because this is about our modern life. Because these modern technologies, which make our life so easy, so wonderful, the same time, always, everything has a flip side. And our aim and our task as members of the parliaments, as politicians, is to do everything we can to give our citizens possibility to use the best from these technologies, but to protect them from the worst things from these technologies, to protect their private life, to protect democracy, because democracy can be attacked by this too. From one side, social media today equals democracy. From another side, these modern technologies can be used to attack political activists, or lawyers, or those who are fighting for human rights, or for those who are fighting corruption. So that is so important for us to defend our people from such events. So this report is extremely in time. And you know that when it's famous, this word in Big Brother watches you, we need to do everything we can in our capacity as parliamentarians, that not Big Brother should watch us, but we should watch Big Brother. Thank you very much, and thanks again for a brilliant report.
Thank you so much. And we continue to Mrs. Olena Homenko from Ukraine and the European Conservatives. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, probably most of you carry your phones everywhere you go. And we all improved our efficiency and connections with the outer world, but also we all enabled surveillance to the extent we have never seen before. Pegasus, this seemingly innocuous name, has a far-reaching impact on our fundamental human rights. It is a technology that can infringe upon the very essence of our right to privacy, a right enshrined in the Convention. Shall we become paranoid about the technologies that surround us? A healthy bit of concern is important, but when it goes as deep as to harm the very human dignity, then it is a very worrisome development. At the same time, we cannot dismiss the importance of this kind of technology for the purposes of national security. Why should we place ourselves in a losing position against criminals and terrorists wishing to harm our democracy and our way of life? In democratic societies, our elected representatives must play a pivotal role in overseeing the use of such powerful technologies. Parliamentary committees and oversight bodies should strengthen democratic civilian control over the security sector bodies to ensure they align with the law and respect human rights. Proper judicial authorization of surveillance operations is crucial. Recommendation on behalf of the Committee of Ministers would be also helpful. It may include the experience of the Venice Commission on elaborating the powers of police and security agencies to strike the right balance between different values. In conclusion, the Pegasus spyware forces us to confront a complex dilemma. We must protect our human rights, especially the right to privacy, while also acknowledging the genuine concerns surrounding national security. The key lies in comprehensive regulations, proper authorization, and robust control mechanisms, including parliamentary oversight. In this digital age, international cooperation and dialogue are essential to finding solutions that safeguard our rights and our security. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Homenko. And then we continue to Mrs. Thorhildur Sunna Eversdottir from Iceland and the Socialist Group. But she is not in the place 91. Nowhere else. No. Then we continue to Mr. Lornik Nagaksa from Hungary and the EPP Group.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Pablo Hispan for his words. I totally agree with him. In a different aspect, in the report of Peter Omtzig, Hungary, along with several other countries like Poland and Spain, has been accused of the Pegasus surveillance spyware has been illegally deployed for political purposes to spy on journalists, opposition politicians, lawyers, prosecutors and civil society actors. The report states that there is mounting evidence, but cannot mention any allegation, accusation, but at the same time, it's also the verdict. This part of the report is nothing more than just a copy-paste of the so-called investigation carried out by the European Parliament's PEGA committee. The national security area and investigation in this field is a competence of member states. Neither the European Parliament nor the Council of Europe has any legitimation to investigate national security issues. However, as Hungary has been accused, immediately the Hungarian National Authority for Data Protection and Freedom of Information carried out a full-scale investigation. The investigation concluded that the Hungarian National Security Service did not use any illegal surveillance software. All its actions were always in compliance with the legal framework. Again, all its actions were always in compliance with the legal framework and on the grounds of national security. After this very thorough investigation, which wasn't taken into consideration by the rapporteur in the resolution, we can say that what is in this report about Hungary, it's not true. It's a great pity that on such a sensitive issue like national security, especially during these difficult times full of security challenges, a politically biased report has been made. I think it's a pity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nagatsa. And then we continue to Mrs. Zeynep Yildiz from Turkey. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur for his report that draws our attention to the extent of problem that stems from the illegitimate use of hacking software. We understand from the findings of investigation that Pegasus is perhaps the most powerful software that is capable of infecting millions of phones. And once it infects the phones, it can extract any kind of information from the phone and is able to locate the targeted person. To make things worse, even the most security-conscious mobile phone users are unable to detect or prevent an attack. As clearly revealed in the report, widespread use of Pegasus against opposition, human rights defenders and journalists by several European states poses an enormous threat against the rights guaranteed by international instruments. Recent inquiries on the use of Pegasus presented us a quite complicated picture. Surveillance of persons such as politicians, journalists, human rights defenders requires to think on obligations of states and protection mechanisms in place. As explained in the report, national legislative frameworks must be put in place to oversight use of similar software by states and to provide effective safeguards and remedies for its citizens. Considering the fact that Pegasus enables states to perpetrate transnational surveillance, we must also focus on a wider international framework that will guarantee the rights of all persons living in Europe. I hope that we could ensure the existing instruments that could help guarantee the necessary safeguards for protection of human rights, and this report will enable member states to look into their legislative framework with a view to protect their citizens from such attacks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Yildiz. And then the next speaker is Mrs. Catarina Rocha Ferreira from Portugal and representing the EPP group. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, let me start underlining the importance of this report because it analyzes the use of Pegasus and similar spyware by several countries. However, the problem is that when a report analyzes several countries, more than one country, we cannot think that each one acts the same and condemn all the same way. Each case, it's different. And what happens is, in many cases, the spyware has been used far beyond its original design, and it can represent a threat to our democracies. As is what's stated before, Pegasus and similar spyware have been widely misused, namely to attack smartphones of political opponents, social activists, journalists, or just anyone. We are speaking about an untraceable spyware that mirrors everything a person does on their phone and that can access microphone and camera. Remembering George Orwell's book 1984, there were posters all over Oceania saying, "Big Brother is watching you." Today, we have no posters, but this dystopian fiction can be a reality in several places. In fact, anyone could be a victim of such a spyware. However, it might not be because that person is a dangerous criminal or a terrorist. If that was the reason, that would be acceptable. But anyone can be spied for political reasons, and that is unacceptable in a healthy democracy. That is a violation of the rule of law, of democracy, and its institutions. Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights states that everyone has the right to respect for his privacy and his family life, his home, and his correspondence. And as the report states, spywares must be limited to exceptional circumstances as a measure of last resort for genuine and serious threat to national security or specific and defined serious crimes. So it is important that democratic countries abstain from using this spyware until their legislative framework is fully in line with the standards of the European Court of Human Rights and the requirements of the Convention. I believe it is our duty to create measures that mitigate risks to democracy and to protect the fundamental rights of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ferreira. And then the next speaker is Mr. Nuno Carvalho from Portugal and the EPP Group. The floor is yours. The micro.
Yes,
Thank
okay, it's working. Thank you, Madam President. Well, first let me congratulate the rapporteur for this report, which is very important because we're talking about monitorizing our own democracies. And of course, first of all, it recognizes the importance of this instrument in extreme situations regarding terrorism, crimes. And of course, this is an instrument that may become a very valuable weapon against this type of crimes and threats to our democracy. But also, like any other weapon, if it is misused, it may become a threat to our own democracy. So the first step that I would like to underline is the importance of the democracies to be able to monitorize the use of this software. The second is the importance that we need to give to this in order to understand that we may speak of certain countries, but of course that if a certain country trades this technology with other country, we can actually have a very difficult situation in which we can just enlarge the danger of this software. So we need a framework in which all countries that have this technology need to act and need to assume a compromise in order to use this in a better way, which also includes not give this technology away so simply to other countries. So this aspect, I think, is very important. And of course, let me say, I think it's also important that if there are countries that are using this spyware, and of course, I do think that it is important to use them in these specific cases, terrorism or other type of crimes, well, they should say that they are using it, they should declare, and they should develop the instruments in order to monitorize their actions, monitorize the usage of this technology. Otherwise, if this surveillance on this software does not happen, then we do have a threat to democracy, because it's far away too powerful for its usage not to be surveilled, not to be monitorized by all the instruments that democracy, a solid democracy has. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carvalho. The next speaker will be Mrs. Yeltsinaveta Yasko from Ukraine and the EPP Group.
Dear colleagues, dear rapporteur, definitely I want to congratulate Peter Omtzigt for opening this Pandora box in this hall. But I think the problem is that this Pandora box is still quite small, because the problem is much bigger than that. It's not only about one spyware app. It's about our reality that we live in. And you know, during recent years, when I hear different conversations about the role of artificial intelligence, about different software, I often have very mixed feelings. Because from one side, many of that artificial intelligence is offering some new positive things into your life. But in the same time, the things that we're discussing here is that we are always under the watch of the big brother, or the big brother is living with us. We actually don't know even what goods we may go and buy, because the internet and the software that we are using is offering us what to buy. I often hear how much we should use artificial intelligence for different good political purposes. But in fact, if we look what happens not only in the intelligence that someone is watching us, but into our everyday lives and in our political societies, we will see that there is so much more polarizations in this society, there is so much more hatred, there is so much more violence, and in fact, the digital technologies are serving as the tools to promote that very often. So my question is, when we will start talking about creating something positive with the technology that not only will restrict us and put us into the hatred, but I don't know, maybe will make something good for us? It's quite a philosophical question. But I just want also to raise a very interesting thing. While reading some more about the Pegasus software, I discovered that Meta and WhatsApp and, for instance, Apple actually have the lawsuits against this spy software. But we know that lots of technologies is still sharing our personal information, not maybe for only intelligence, but for, I don't know, commercial reasons. Do we want that? I'm sure that lots of policies are still in our hands, but we should not only just complain and say that the big brother is watching us, but actually we should be working to prevent these things to happen, not only for the intelligence and that software, but to create positive solutions for our policies in our countries and to solve the problems of polarization and hatred and the violence, because we have many problems, and it's only one of them that we just discussed now.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Jasko. The next and the last speaker is Mrs. Laura Castel from Spain and the United European Left. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. First, let me congratulate the Rapporteur and the Secretariat for this important and brave report. Last year, it was revealed that almost 70 Catalan citizens had been victims of permanent surveillance with Pegasus spyware for the last 5 years in an unprecedented attack on a democratic movement. The Spanish Secret Service acknowledged having spied 18 of them with judicial authorization, arguing that they wanted to investigate who was organizing demonstrations against the imprisonment of Catalan political prisoners. That was in 2019, but the first infection was detected 4 years before, and the government denied being aware to whom the secret services were spying on. So who gave the order? Many questions remain unresolved. Which are the legal provisions that allow the use of spyware on democratic forces? Why cannot the targeted victims have access to the data extracted from their personal devices? Why cannot the victims and lawyers have access to the judicial authorization of this surveillance? Despite all of this, the creation of an inquiry committee in the Parliament was blocked by the far-right party, the two right political parties, and the Socialist Party. So no possibility to conduct parliamentary investigation on that. The German Constitutional Court recalled that a commission of inquiry performs a function of oversight, which, by its very nature, demands the disclosure of information even against the government's wishes, precisely for the detection of abuses, infringements of law, and clarify accountability. Moreover, the Official Secrets Committee of the Spanish Parliament is neither useful nor transparent, since its meetings are in camera and all its members are required to keep secrecy on the content. We should keep in mind that the Venice Commission has highlighted the need to monitor the security services to prevent them from developing a state-within-a-state mentality. Finally, the lack of judicial diligence towards the investigation of the Catalan case confirms that justice delayed is justice denied, as we have stuck this case in the courts with no investigation for half a year ago. To conclude, the Committee of Ministers stressed that where the cloak of secrecy is used to cover violations of human rights, not only have state authorities failed to live up to their duty to protect the rights of their citizens, but also democracy and rule of law are seriously in danger. So I encourage all of you to vote in favor of this important report and, of course, against the amendments. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, the rapporteur.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Castel. I will now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been presented during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I call Mr. Omtzigt, the rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, dear colleagues, and thank you for the comments on this work. And also thank you for the cooperation. Let me start with Mr. Brenner, because that was the most interesting speech. Because he doesn't know whether he's been spied on. And it's exactly that chilling effect, which you know that your government is using it, but you don't know whether the government is using it against you, which is the dangerous thing of this spyware being used. And if we don't realize that here, we are in complete denial of the infringements on human rights this particular spyware presents. Because for all of our friends, let's first go to Hungary. Thank you, Mr. Sansa, for pointing out. I did write a letter to the Hungarian government. It just never got any reply. And yes, there was an investigation, but by the Data Protection Agency. That's not the investigation we need. They don't even have the power to fully investigate into state security. And you mentioned that the Poles, that I cannot say that their election was not fair. Well, they actually spied on Mr. Brescia, who was a senator and who was the leader of the Civic Platform at the time, the leading campaigner of the Civic Platform, and all his messages were spied on. The infringement was larger than the Watergate infringement, when the president of the US had to resign. Here, the government knew everything the opposition was doing to try to win the election. If that's the case, the election is not fair. Full stop. Then let's go to Spain. Well, is there any judicial supervision? Well, there might be. But judicial warrants, after all these years, have still not been published. So if you're a victim, you can't even have access to the judicial warrant. So what do you think will then happen? There is no openness. And I say this to my Spanish colleagues, if everything went according to the rules and you just were afraid of state secrecy, what are you afraid of if we ask for a full investigation? There could not be anything you are afraid of, because after this has been used, and I'm aware that having a referendum on independence of part of your territory is something which really impacts your country. But after that has happened and after the episode has finished, you do a parliamentary inquiry to find out how people acted on both sides and how the state acts. And that's the last thing. For my Hungarian friend who said, the Council of Europe has nothing to do with it. The Council of Europe has everything to do with it. The Council of Europe has full competency on state security. And why does it have full competency? Because under the guise of state security, the most heinous ways of contraventions of the conventions have taken place. So that's why we need those investigations in those 5 countries. That's why we need this Venice Commission report. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Omtzigt. The floor is yours, Mr. Omtzigt.
Yes, well, this actually makes the problem clear. These people cannot get access to the documents from the courts, whether they have been spied on. So that's very, very problematic. And by the way, it was not just that they declared it themselves, it was also declared by a number of journalists and publications. Not all of them came forward. And this is exactly the same language in my report as which was used by the PEGA committee here in the European Parliament. So that's why I would recommend against this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Omtzigt. Was this the opinion of the committee? Mr. Cottier?
Madame la Présidente, la Commission a soutenu cet amendement par une courte majorité.
Small majority supported the amendment. I shall now put the amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Yes, and Amendment 4 is rejected. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Yes, Mr. Omtzigt.
Well, this would be problematic. In any inquiry, take the parliamentary inquiry on Corona, you're not waiting for all court cases to be finished. And the court cases here will run for years and probably even a decade, because people do not even know who was spied on. So if you don't want any investigation by the parliament or by the government, you should say we wait till the end of the court case, and then we could even end up here at the European Court of Human Rights. I think it's time for Spain to start an official investigation, and that's why I strongly feel you should reject this amendment, even though it was accepted by one vote in the committee. But please vote against.
Thank you, Mr. Omtzigt. What is the opinion of the committee?
Madam President, I can confirm what the rapporteur just said. The committee supported the amendment, but with the shortest possible majority of one vote.
Thank you, and I shall now put the amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And Amendment 6 is rejected. I want to speak against the amendment. Yes, Mr. Omtzigt, the floor is yours.
Well, it says that the people that should be targeted should have access to information. They do not have access to information in Spain. They don't even get the judicial warrant from which it was claimed that permission was given. So if you get that, if you don't get that, you don't get any information. So we ask this from all 5 governments which have been found, but we definitely ask it from Spain, so I definitely ask you to reject this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Omtzigt. The opinion of the committee?
Madam President, a short majority of the committee was against this amendment.
Thank you, and I shall now put the amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the amendment is rejected. Yes, it's still Mr. Omtzigt. The floor is yours.
Well, we found 5 countries, and we've determined that they've used it. So when we ask the Venice Commission to write a report, we don't stigmatize any country. We just say, these are the 5 countries where we found Pegasus. Take them with priority. If you need any other ones, also do so. And for good measure, I've also added countries which are using Pegasus, but where we've not yet found any misuse. One of those countries is the Netherlands, it's my own country. And I'm not afraid of mentioning my own country to be taken a closer look at. So I'd really like you to reject this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Omtzigt. What is the opinion of the committee?
Madam President, a clear majority of the committee was against this amendment.
Clear majority against. The vote is open. I put the amendment to the vote, and the vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the amendment 9 is rejected. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15825 as amended. A simple majority is required, and the vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Yes, and the draft resolution in document 15825 is adopted. We will now consider the draft recommendation contained in document 15825, to which 2 amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 1 and 2 to the draft recommendation, which was unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Courtier?
It is so, Madam President.
It is so. Thank you. Does anyone object? Then you have to raise your hand. I see no hand. As there is no objection, I declare that Amendment 1 and 2 to the draft recommendation have been agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 15825 as amended. A 2/3 majority is required. The vote is now open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And the draft recommendation in document 15825 as amended is adopted. Thank you.